Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Kate Absher, and I'm the manager for fashion and digital design at Cotton Incorporated. I'm joined today by Miguel Huidor and Pearl Malakul, two of our excellent textile education consultants here at Cotton Incorporated. And they're going to be talking to you about digital product creation, setting standards, and best practices. They have a lot of great information and expertise to share with you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Miguel to start the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, everyone, for attending and joining us on this webinar. Pearl and I are very excited to present this to you and to share our learnings on DPC and best practices. So the goal of this webinar is to improve the understanding of how digital standards and their implementation can assist in creating best practices in digital product creation workflows and business processes. The most efficient approach to developing digital products is to set long-term strategies catering to both current and future technology requirements. This approach can empower brands to recognize present technology limitations while factoring in future design and business goals when making decisions. So what we're going to look at in this presentation are the what, why, and how for DPC. So what are some of the best practices in DPC? We're going to look at creating standards, engaging stakeholders, and implementation across the DPC process. We're going to look at why we should use these. Really, it's about creating consistency and building success so that you can build a successful DPC process for the future. And now the how, I will go into how to get started. So the first thing we're going to look at, my section is going to be on setting standards, and Pearl will discuss implementation processes. So for setting standards, the first thing you want to consider is really the end goal or end use of your 3D assets. Are they going to be internal or are they going to be consumer facing? And once you decide that, then it's about looking at the different categories to set standards in. So it's really important to kind of consider setting these standards before you jump into DPC, because otherwise this is going to help you minimize errors and help you build confidence and success in your DPC journey. So we're going to look at digital fabric standards, creating avatar, sewing, render, and lighting standards. All of these together will give you great 3D assets and help to build the confidence and success that you need to make DPC work for your company. So when I speak about end use, really it's about is this going to be just for internal uses or is this going to be consumer facing? And the reason the end use is important is you can build your 3D assets in two different ways. If it's going to be internal, really meant for your merchandising team, your sales team, or line sheets, you can build lower resolution 3D assets. If it's going to be consumer facing, then you want to build them at a higher resolution that has more detail, the correct scanned fabrics and textures, as well as being PBR ready, which means they will be able to reflect light in the correct manner in different environments. So with DPC and 3D assets, it's going to be all about your pattern, the 3D model, and it's going to be all about your fabric. And one roadblock that we're noticing already in this journey that some brands are experiencing is inconsistency in the scanning materials. So in digitizing your physical fabrics into 3D, you might be doing some of it internally, and you might have your vendors doing or your mill partners doing it, and you might be using external partners to digitize fabrics for you. And what we're noticing is that people might be using different technology, different translation machines. So there's going to be some inconsistency. So when you start to digitize your fabrics, try to be as consistent as possible. At least use the same technology within your company and your vendor partners. Or, even if it's someone internally, try to have it be the same person always doing the digitizing of the fabrics and not multiple people, because just the whole process of digitizing fabrics can actually vary from person to person. So really kind of consider that as your starting off point. As you start to digitize your fabrics, it's going to be important to create naming conventions. So I worked for a major retail company, as did Pearl, and we didn't have hundreds of fabrics, we had thousands of fabrics. So just from the get-go, set your naming conventions so the fabrics are searchable and people can find what they're going to be looking for. Next, as part of your naming convention, is categorize your fabrics. Consider the weight, for instance, like light, medium, heavy. If you have other categories, obviously by fabrication, really build that into your naming convention, because once you have thousands of fabrics in your library, it's going to be very challenging to find it unless you really start off on the right step. The next part is really establishing your digital library or your materials library. The 3D programs make it possible to build your own libraries, build and store your own libraries. So our recommendation as well is actually start with your core fabrics. Don't jump into scanning everything. Start with your core and replenishment fabrics. Get those done right, build the libraries for them, and then start to build in your seasonal fabrics and your fashion fabrics. Part of the reason for this is that there's a lot of wasted time and energy done at the beginning when you're designing a season, and you might start to want to scan everything. Now, your adoption rate might be 20% or 40% if you're lucky. So that means that 60% of those scan fabrics are going to get dropped off. So the best thing to do would actually be use fabrics at the beginning of the design stage that are just close enough. If it's a woven and you have several woven options, use those options until the garment is adopted. And then once that garment is adopted, then do the final scan for color, texture, and physics. That's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money long term. Another resource for you is actually to, if you're looking for fabrics that are going to be close enough, is to utilize the Cottonworks Fabricast archive. We have over 300 inspirational cotton and cotton-rich fabrics. For the digitized fabrics, they are compatible with Clo and with Browseware. And going forward from 2021, every fabric we put in there will be physical and digital wherever possible. But this is a really great resource to use if you're just getting started in your DPC journey. Download these fabrics when you need to find something that's close enough, and then you could further develop into physical fabric, or you could substitute with your own fabric once you're ready. But it's a really great resource to get started. Avatar standards are another important thing to consider when you're getting started. Some of the errors that we've kind of seen in the industry going forward is every brand you have your own fit model, and you have usually a physical dress form based off of that fit model. But when you go into DPC, people are creating their own avatars from scratch, and it's not really meeting your standards. So the best thing to do is to create a digital twin of your physical dress form into your 3D program. And pretty much all the dress form suppliers do this now, so it's a really great tool to use. And once you have that done, then whoever is using it, whether it's the design team or the tech team or your supplier, you're all working off of the same digital dress form. So there aren't going to be any errors in making adjustments because it's draping differently on a different digital body. So once you have these digital dress forms, you can share them with your suppliers, share them with all the teams that will be touching it internally. So you're all working from the same standard. You can customize these avatars with specific measurements and markings on them. And the addition to this is you can actually have a digital avatar for all your graded sizes. So I know personally, we only had 1 or 2 fit models, and we only had 1 dress form. We didn't have a dress form for every fit size. So this is actually a really great advantage to be able to do your technical fittings on avatars for all scaled sizes. The next part of the journey for learning is actually building your translation knowledge between the digital and the physical. So this is going to be very new for people, and DPC and 3D technology has advanced tremendously in the last 10 years. It's still not 100%. So you still want to kind of build your knowledge of how a fabric drapes in the physical versus how that same fabric drapes in the digital. Now, this is huge. I've talked to so many brands that are kind of approaching this the wrong way. They're jumping into DPC and they're designing patterns from scratch in DPC, and then they get really disappointed when they get the prototypes back and they don't look great. Fashion and apparel is analog first. You have to start off with patterns that have been approved for production, where you have fixed the drape, you have fixed the pitch of it, and then you import those into DPC. So don't have your designer, who's not a professional pattern maker, be making up their own patterns and then gets disappointed when it doesn't look great, right? So a big tip to build success at the beginning, start off with your catalog of approved patterns, digitize them all, and use those to modify once you're in the 3D programs. This whole learning the translation, it's a journey. It's going to take a while, but it's a great way to build trust and confidence with your other key players when you show them this is what the physical and this is what the digital version looks like. And they will be pretty close to identical once you get everything done right. Sewing standards, these 3D programs, you can be very detailed and very technical. This is just a simple illustration of showing that you can actually show the different thread sizes as well as different SPIs. But with these 3D programs, you can actually build them the way you want them to be manufactured. So your internal seams, the kind of stitching that you want, even the order that you want seams to be pressed or stitched can also be included in these. And so the goal of really establishing your sewing standards is that everything that you send out in 3D can actually come back more accurate in the physical sample, because the supplier will be using that as their starting off point instead of just a regular paper sketch. So really think about your setting up your sewing standards, especially by classification, because once you get that done, it'll make everything so much easier once you move forward. So in the beginning, I talked about, think about your end use. Is it going to be something internal or external? And this is why. So when you're building your 3D assets, you can build something very cheap and easy, like on the left side, or something more detailed, like on the right side. The difference is the more detail equals more time to create and equals a much larger file size. So as you look at this illustration, the one on the left is built in a lower particle distance, which means these little triangles are further apart, which means it translates into a coarser drape. This image also, the waistband was not built properly. It was just built with one layer of fabric. So it looks a bit crinkly and doesn't look great. But you can execute this version much faster and the file size will be lower. The image on the right, on the other hand, was built with the right construction. It has 2 layers for the waistband as well as an internal elastic. And it's at a much higher particle distance. So the drape of the fabric and the ruching at the waistband of the elastic looks a lot more natural. This will render beautifully if you ever do a high resolution render that is consumer facing. So the downside is it takes longer and more finesse to get your 3D apparel to this level. And the file size is going to be much larger because of the higher particle distance, but it is going to give you really commercial ready 3D assets. The last standard to consider, and this is actually kind of a huge one, is actually your rendering and lighting settings. So in this image here, you see the same garment and the same model, but lit in 3 different ways. And it really affects the way the garment looks. It changes the color, it changes the contrast of it. So it's really important to set up your lighting and rendering outputs at the beginning so that you have consistency. You can basically create your own standards. If you don't have the comfort in terms of knowing how to light this, you can outsource that, have those preferences saved, and then you basically just share these preferences with all your teams as well as your external partners. So no matter who is creating a render, they will always look the same. And so if you can imagine, if you have a line with several hundred or even 1,000 pieces, if they're all lit in different environments from warm to cool and contrasty to non-contrasty, it's going to look a big mess. But if you standardize it, it will all look consistent and cohesive. And one great development that actually happened this last summer is one of the 3D programs actually included a great plugin that lets you set these standards for your lighting and your rendering, and it lets you bulk render everything at once, which is a fantastic tool. So that's pretty much it for like some of the key best practices for standards. Just to kind of summarize, consider your end use from the beginning so that you're starting off in the right way. If it needs to be quick and dirty, then go quick and dirty, but know that you can't use that for something that's going to be consumer facing. The advantages of setting up standards at the beginning is that you're going to have control of quality and control of output within your internal teams and with your external vendors. DPC is a big journey and it requires a lot of work, and so it requires a lot of teams working together. And then, even if you're going the high resolution avenue, there's going to be a lot of time and investment put up front. but it's going to pay off because it's going to give you consistency that will lead to long-term success with your DPC journey. So I'm now going to pass it over to Pearl, and Pearl will go over implementation.
Hi, everyone. So I'm happy to be here and to present the remaining portion of our presentation today. So we will be going over the implementation part, and it's all about strategy planning. So some of the things that we've seen are that there are some major key challenges in adopting this brand new technology within your brands. And first, we're going to look at what happens in the internal team. So what's very important to get support from in the very beginning is from your upper management. If you're able to do that, they're able to help you with providing a budget, staff, and time in order to get this new journey on in a right way. They can also help you with a culture change. We in the industry are so used to physical samples, and by them helping you with these new cultural changes within our organizations, we will be going towards utilizing less of the physical samples and really reliant more on 3D samples to begin with. And this new way of working really is something to be implemented throughout your entire process and your internal teams, from design all the way to your sales teams. Another key challenge is that not every single vendor and fabric mill will have these capabilities. My suggestion is to go with your tried and true partners that have already mastered this technology, especially because they've been working with other brands that have been more advanced. Training is something that is ongoing. It's not something that you can learn so quickly and then adopt rapidly. It's something that needs to be calibrated throughout your entire process. And costs, as I mentioned earlier, your leadership team will need to provide you with a budget so that you can actually implement these new tools on your 3D journey. Other areas of challenge or of challenges could be of technical aspects, and they can be of technical islands. And what I mean by that is a lot of the 3D services and design platforms actually don't share capabilities. And this is where we have seen technology islands because they're proprietary to those design services. Other areas of challenges could be that there's different ways of digitizing fabrics. There could be one way in an advanced CAD fabric development tool, which does not necessarily translate directly into the 3D design services. Others are the scanning capabilities. So the scanning capabilities of digitizing your raw materials are limited to the repeat size of your fabric. Let's say you have a print. Other things that are of interest of these challenges are that there could be some fabric after treatments, like let's say some washes or some textures in high piled fabrics that might not register in textures in 3D as well. Another area is color. So color, as we all know, is not always calibrated on everyone's monitors. So it's not always 100% color accurate on your monitors. Fit is something that we could look at as a estimate. As Miguel mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we start analog first to make sure your patterns are done in that manner in the beginning. And memory size, these files, as Miguel mentioned, are really large, so that we want to make sure that you have the right type of storage for your brand. So next, we're going to go forward with the different types of stages within our industry. So we've mapped it out in 4 different categories. So the curious are brands that are just starting out in 3D, or actually looking into the different types of technologies. They are still 100% utilizing physical samples. The next are the beginners. The beginners have really started. Maybe it's in their marketing platform or in their digital showrooms, but they are still utilizing a lot of the physical samples, about 90 to 100%. And the next 2 are going to be the more advanced areas of our industry, the intermediate and the progressives. The intermediates are utilizing 3D in their product development lifecycle and also in their marketing. just to show some examples, but they are actually about 50% utilizing their 3D designs, and then also 50% utilizing physical samples still. And the progressives, these are brands that are very, very advanced in 3D. They've been utilizing this for a variety of different years now and are looking to the next generation of generative AI in their product development lifecycle. And they're about using 10 to 20% of physical samples. Some of their lines are using 100% 3D samples, but there's always going to be some categories that you still need for physical samples. Next is the strategic planning and looking for scaling for efficiencies. As I mentioned before, this is an area that needs to be done throughout your entire product development lifecycle, from your design all the way to your all the way to your sales teams. It's not something that you just want to focus on one area. It's a calibration of your entire team. Strategic goals, it's really important to set some KPIs and some SOPs eventually so that you can have consistency within your brand from design, again, all the way through your merchants team. Time management, you want to make sure that you level set so that you have a really good journey in your 3D process, so that you have some influences from your wins that you gain on from your earlier adopters of your fast and easier products. And lastly, we want to make sure that you have the right technology stacks so that you have the right 3D design softwares, material, all the way through your product lifecycle management tools as well. Everything should really be seamlessly integrated with one another. And the last few slides I'll be going over are your process maps. And this is all about looking at your technology stack all the way through your marketing to your consumer. We're going to do a deeper dive in each section. So your technology stack, this goes from your PLM system, PIM or DAM, all the way through your merchandising software integration tools as well. You want to make sure that you also make sure that you set some time with your IT team to get some security clearances so that everything is compatible. We've seen some successes from some of the brands that actually are startups that don't have a lot of historical data to have to translate into this new technology. Whereas big brands that Miguel and I have worked for, it just takes a little bit more time to integrate and pick the correct tools that will work with your existing heritage systems. And training. It's all about training throughout your technical design, your design team, your product development teams, as well as your raw material teams. And all this, we have initial time about 6 months to start, but it is ongoing because technology is always advancing. The next we're going to look at are libraries. So there's two that we'll be going over. It's a material library. So we want to start off with more of the simplistic raw materials. And this is what we call core or foundational raw materials. It could also be for your trims as well. And for those of you who have an internal team that can actually do this, it's fantastic. But for those brands that are smaller, you might want to look at outsourcing this to third-party vendors who are, there's so many of them out there right now that can actually help you with your onboarding process. Other areas, as Miguel mentioned earlier, is to looking at your core block styles. So again, this is not something that is out of the ordinary that brands would do with the physical form. We're just now doing it in a digital format. So again, looking at your core raw materials in the very beginning, and then looking at your core block styles. It could be core replenishment or maybe some graphic tees. And then anything that's a little bit more difficult, you might want to outsource that to either your vendors or your third-party resources. Standards, it's really important to have standards throughout your entire process so that you have uniformity. It's something that some brands, when they first started, didn't actually set their standards, and it made it more difficult for them to track what was the correct base that they started with. So you want to make sure that you have that all standards are utilized within your material libraries, your avatar standards, sewing, as Miguel mentioned earlier, render standards, and also even in lighting. All these timelines, we have an initial stage of 3 months, but again, it is ongoing because technology is always evolving. And how to start is maybe looking at some of your most simplistic items within your brands. So simplistic garments with trims. It can also lead to some successes in building out your tech packs as well. And then once you have that built out, you can then calibrate moving forward. You want to make sure that these calibrations and your KPIs that you're setting for your brands is something that can be translated and can be repeated as well. So technical gains could be some vendor checks with your garment and your vendors with your mills as well, to make sure that you have a simple process that can be actually followed. Setting KPIs is something that is really important, and a lot of brands miss in the very beginning. You want to make sure that you're setting metrics so that you can actually look back on any kind of time savings, material savings of less usage of raw materials. And any time that you can save on your calendar is always great for your brands as well. Is there an ability to save on overhead expenses or sustainability? These are so important to track so that you can actually create a case for upper management as well to see how the return of investments can be shown. And lastly, this is the last slide of implementation, is looking at how to expand your categories. Now that you feel confident in your core raw materials and core style blocks, you can then move into possibly in more of your fashion styles or more complicated. And again, if you're not ready to move forward, but you do as a brand want to move physically move forward, you can actually outsource those products, whether it be material or your blocks, into your third-party resources. And in sales and merchandising teams, one thing that we can actually do, which we've not been able to do in the previous physical calendar that we're all used to, is actually have your merchants and sales teams more involved in the very beginning, because they can see these digital assets much earlier on in the concept stage. And once they're able to see that, we can make quick changes as opposed to waiting weeks or months on end for your physical samples to come in. And it's also about collaboration of these tools. So you can actually use these 3D assets to then funnel into merchants and sales teams on their line sheets and line assortment sheets as well. And lastly, for our marketing team, this is all about how can we reach our customer earlier on? Can we do some tests on social media? Can we actually utilize the same assets on our websites? And can we do some customizations for our customers as well? We can get those feedbacks much earlier than we've done in previous times. And most recently, as you may have seen, we have seen a growth in virtual showrooms. And Cotton Incorporated has just launched their own virtual showroom within the last few months. So I really I invite you guys to look at that virtual showroom when you have a chance. And we also have seen a big tick in virtual fashion shows as well, especially because of the pandemic. And just to recap, this is both my recap and Miguel's recap from the very beginning. Please start small so you can really create a great strategic plan for your organization and have a great success and gain those champions along the way. Choose the right software that is compatible with your existing product development software, and take that time in order to make sure that they are compatible. Set KPIs and targets this way that you can have some wins and you can actually show those metrics to your leaders so that they can see their return of investment. And physical first, it's really important when you work on your patterns that you actually start with a physical analog pattern first before you actually go into 3D. This way it ensures a better fit quality of your product. Again, we want to make sure that you start simple first so that you can gain those exciting wins and get those champions across the way. And setting standards, if you set your standards up first, it really helps you in the long run, and make sure that you don't have too many people who can actually change these standards. It's the same as when you set standards in your regular either fabric testing or in garment in your garment testing forms as well. You don't want too many people to have access to change them. Leveraging your partners and having a resource of third-party vendors is really important, especially when you're just starting. You'd be surprised how many vendors are out there that have already been in this technology for a variety of years now. And manage culture. This is a huge cultural change for us in the fashion industry. We're so used to physical samples first, but with this new way of working, once you get some wins, you can actually gain some champions so that they can reinforce as well as gain trust along the way. So upskilling, I would say that this is something that's really important. So whether it be your existing team or new onboard or new hires, training is really important, that you do this along the way, because it's not just the foundation, it's also to upskill while the technology continues to evolve as well. And scale. Once you have that confidence of building your core replenishment or maybe some graphic tees, then move on to fashion categories or more complicated styles in your product category. And then lastly, time well spent in the very beginning to set those standards and set those implementations and goals is how we're going to be successful in the implementation of 3D. So I am done with my portion. So the rest is going to be the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Pearl and Miguel. It's now time to answer some questions. Please feel free to submit your questions into the Q&A, and we have a couple already. So the first one is about, will the recording be shared with people who registered? I'm going to take that one. Generally, we don't send out the recording to everyone who registered, but this presentation will be uploaded to the digital product creation page on Cottonworks. If you go to cottonworks.com under topics, you can find the digital product creation page, and we should have it up by the end of next week. So if you want to review the content, it will be there for you. Our next question is, we can discuss this together. Do you have recommendations for color, considerations for building the best palette for a program or platform? How is color managed throughout the digital platform?
I can take that. So for those of you who are new to the 3D area, believe it or not, a lot of the color services have already been implemented within the 3D design software. So for those of you who know Pantone or Chroma, and a new player on the block is Coloro, they have palettes that you can easily download within your design software. There's also some extensions of actual color approval processes, but they're not necessarily linked with the design software. This is something that would have to be built out into a new way of looking at your product development lifecycle management tools. There are a couple brands out there that offer this, but again, it's about the physical fabric color approval versus the digital color approval.
I'm just going to add on to that. There's been a lot of advancement as well, as Pearl said, with approving color digitally only. And, for instance, Coloroo actually has a really great addition to that in their software platform. The other thing is color is a huge issue with DPC, because not everyone's monitor is the same, not everyone's mobile device is the same. And so you're going to come across a lot of issues where people are going to say, I don't like what this looks like. So this is going to be where you have to say, well, you have to look to the physical approved color standard to make that decision, because it may look great on your color corrected monitor, but your manager might be looking at the image on their cell phone, right? And that's where the big disconnect is. So this has been talked about in the industry. People are trying to work on the solution, but it is a big challenge. I just raised this up that it's good to be aware. So when you get that kind of pushback, you'd be like, hey, well, we're actually referring to the physical color standard. Take a look at this, because everyone's monitor is going to be different.
I'm just going to add just a little bit more on this. There's certain brands that I've spoken to where it's, if you have a color team, this is where that is super helpful, where only a few people are actually allowed to make any color comments because they have monitors that are color calibrated, and they walked away from looking at the phone. No one was allowed to actually make any color comments on the phone because every phone is different, where you can buy several monitors within your organization that's calibrated every single day, actually. And then once a year, the actual software is updated with the companion of the hardware as well. So color is very difficult to manage.
Great answers. It's clearly a really complex a challenge that the industry is struggling with, and that might be something that we could address in a little bit more detail in a future webinar. We have another question. Do you think it's best to have internal materials teams own the encourage this extra workload? So kind of talking about, whose responsibility is the digitization process, and how can a company kind of take that internally?
Do you want me to, or you want to go?
You started and I'll add
Okay.
on.
So it really depends on the size of your organization. If you have the staff, most of the progressives, as I mentioned earlier in the 4 different categories, they took it on themselves in the very beginning because they wanted to set the standards. I think it's really important for internal brands to actually at least see what the standard setting is like. This is way before that there are actually multiple people, third-party vendors that offer this service that can actually scan your material and digitize your materials out there. But to me, again, it depends on the size of your organization, if you have the time, the staff to do that. But the more that you can control internally, I would say that that's best, at least to set it up. And then once you have that established and you don't have the staff to do it, you can then outsource that to a third-party resource. Miguel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to add on. It's a really good question in terms of the added workload. So to digitize a fabric with the toolkits that are available from the 3D program companies, they take still about like 30, 40 minutes for one fabric, so it definitely is going to add to the workload. It's not something that's just like, oh, it's a couple minutes. That being said, there's also exciting technology being developed where you could scan the fabrics on a flatbed, and it uses artificial intelligence to determine the physics, and that could be a really big game changer where you could actually digitize a fabric in a few minutes versus 40 minutes. So I think it's still evolving, and I think it's still out there, but it's a great question because it goes back to what I brought up about your fabric standards is whichever route you go, just be consistent with it. If you want to start off with an internal team, leave it to 1 or 2 people who are the masters of that, so there will be consistency. And then just make sure you use that same technology with outsourced vendors that you then start to outsource your line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have another question more about kind of workflow recommendations. Do you have a recommendation for the workflow of creation for digital prototypes? Kind of which team would be best to handle that? Is it more the design team? But, you also talked about the difficulty with, people who are not professional pattern makers making a lot of changes and then being unhappy with the results of the physical sample when that comes in. We can speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, I'll take that. So for the workflow, and this is a great question because this is, again, I think where a lot of people are starting off the wrong foot. Again, start with your approved standards. So really